Hello, welcome Natalie.
Hello.
Thanks for joining in this discussion. I do appreciate you giving up your time. You know me, obviously, Celina Grant, Wellbeing Consultant and founder of Healthy Living. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell the people who you are?
I'm Natalie Wright. Yes, I'm Natalie Wright.
Thank you. Okay, so Natalie, you've kindly agreed to join and speak a little bit about, something that's really, really important now and always, really. But just to kick off, really, would you be able to speak a little bit about your experience with mental health? Because I understand that you've previously been diagnosed with clinical depression.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us about your journey up until the point where you've been diagnosed?
Well, I've had to make some notes about this because it's been a very, very long journey. And as I was thinking about how to answer this question, I actually thought how mental health and the experiences have changed me is a good place to start at as well. How it's changed me as a person. And there's been two key moments that I've experienced mental health and it's changed me as a person, which has been experiencing grief and the childbirth of my second child, where I was diagnosed with prenatal depression and postnatal depression. But it wasn't actually the reason. I think before continuing, I want to make it clear that mental health and the experiences have changed me is because of the mental health and the experience I went through, I can never be the same person again. And that's mainly because the tools that I usually used as coping strategies from teens until mid-30s, when I experienced those deep moments of mental health, they no longer worked for me. And up until now, those old patterns no longer work for me. So I'm kind of like a blank slate right now. And that's also what makes things a bit challenging as well, because you don't know which tools to use because you're still learning about yourself and about how to heal. So I thought I'd say that first, but there's been a timeline which I first experienced like childhood trauma at 5 years old, which I didn't recognize until my adulthood. My first noticeable moment of mental health was when I was in 2011, after I'd been awarded a significant amount of money, £250,000 to deliver some projects in Lambeth, and everything was going well, and then the funding was pulled, and then I was out of work for about a year. I went for job interviews, and in those job interviews, there was one key job interview where I went to, and I was on the train and I was crying my eyes out on the train, and actually in the job interview, I just started crying in the interview, and I was like, what is going on? I used to drop my son to school and I'd be jumping if people were walking past me, and I had no clue what was going on for me, and I didn't ever go to the doctors about it. I just kind of battled it for myself. But thinking back in hindsight, I'm like, okay, that must have been anxiety. The second key moment was in 2013, late 2013, when I experienced a close family member dying. She was a really strong support system for me, and I didn't realize how strong she was, and I didn't realize how much she meant to me. I didn't realize how much of a rock she was, though, and that she actually was also my support system and my coping strategies. Having her around softened all of my traumatic experiences. So when she died, along with dealing with the grief and still dealing with real life, and at that time I was still out of work, it was it was a very, very hard process. And I realized that she was my mentor, she was my advisor, she was everything to me. So I no longer had anyone in my head I could speak with. At that time, I was working for a school. At some point during that time of grief, because grief for me lasted from 2013 until 2016. Mm. And at one of those points, I think it was 2015, I was working in a school in South London in the pastoral unit, and I just broke down, and the children were kind of more mentoring me and supporting me, and that's when I realised this isn't right. But the reason I mentioned the school system is because the pastoral care team, who I thought would have been supportive, were not supportive. They took no notice of my grief, took notice of what was going on. I was also suffering extreme back pains as well. And yeah, no one took any notice of anything, and that was a really hard process to deal with. And my coping strategies with that, unfortunately, was alcohol. And the reason I drank alcohol is because it reminded me I was drinking what my godmother was drunk, and so it reminded me of being close to her. But that experience of grief, eventually, once I gave up the work because I couldn't do it, I isolated myself and I became quite agoraphobic. The only person I want to see is my son. There was one stage I remember putting newspaper, because I was living where I was living, people could walk past my flat. I was on the ground floor, but I could see the commuters walking past. And so there was one stage I remember I put up newspapers on my windows so that I couldn't see out and people couldn't see in. And then I left that there for like about a day, but then I didn't want to make my son traumatized and think that I'm going crazy. So I took them down, but I didn't take them. If my son wasn't there, I would have kept them up. But I was still, even when you're going through moments of, I don't even know what that was, grief, mental health, I don't know what that was, because I didn't reach out to doctors. But when you're going through that, there's still moments of clarity in your head. So yeah, even though I did quite a strange move of literally pasting my wall, putting everything on my wall, I knew it wasn't, I knew it could be deemed as madness, I suppose. I lost a lot of friends during that time because I was very expressive with my grief and my sorrow. I'm quite an emotional person, I'm quite an honest person. I was very expressive with it. And the reason I was expressive with my grief is because I've been that support system for others where they can lean on me. So I just naturally thought that I would have the same, I could do the same. But because of that, yeah, I couldn't do the same, and I lost friends. And the reason they tell me that friendships were lost or removed is because they saw me as a strong person, and that they couldn't cope with me being sad and the way that I was. Eventually, by mid 2015, I decided that I needed to get out of the house. I needed to start to speak to people. I'd gone through some counselling, 2 bouts of grief counselling with Mind, and that was really, really helpful. Under being around other groups of people who are going through the same thing as you, and you're just able to share and get things off of your chest, and speak about someone who's dead without anyone else feeling uncomfortable. So by the end of that, I decided I really do need to get out and speak to people, but I'd lost a lot of confidence. And so I applied for a job which was really, really in terms of skill base, I was at the lowest skill set I had. But I went for that job just as kind of like a receptionist at admin. And I'm not in no way saying that admin or receptionist work is at the bottom of the skill level. I'm saying for myself, I've been doing management roles, different roles. And for me, I couldn't cope with doing management. I couldn't cope with being around young people. I couldn't cope with being around anybody. I just wanted to be in an office and speak to nobody. My 2 options of jobs were doing retail at the middle of the night, so I didn't see anyone, or being in an office. And that was just, I knew I needed to kind of build my confidence back up. So I got a job, confidence was built, but I was still extremely, extremely low. And I started taking, I think the only tablets I was taking at that time was for my back. But I kind of was self-medicating on the tablets as well, tramadol and cocodamol. And I was taking them even if I didn't have back problems, because I liked that the way they made me feel quite numb and out of it, and I wouldn't be thinking of sadness or my lack of confidence or anything else. I eventually moved out of the area, knowing that I just needed to do something different for myself. I needed to pull myself up out of it, and I needed some healing. And I moved out into Kent. It wasn't the best thought out move in terms of anything else going on in my life. My son was at college. I was still working in South London, but it was, for me, it was more about healing. And it was actually a very, very healing place to be, and a healing time in my life. I think I was there for about 7-8 months. Then, due to it not being effective to keep commuting, I moved back down, went to a family member's house after I got a new job 3 months later in 2016. And then 3 months after that, I found out I was pregnant. When I was at work there, I was crying every day. I had pains all the time. I didn't know why I was crying. I called the doctor, and then they said that I probably got a bit of hormones, bit of tiredness, and taking time off work. But it got worse for me. I was locking myself in my room. When I heard people laughing, I thought they were laughing at me. When people congratulated me because I was showing in the street, I was crying. So then I thought, you know, something isn't right here. And when I was going to my hospital appointments, I was saying to them, I feel really quite depressed. They said, it's just hormones, it's just hormones. They were making me feel more depressed, professionals around the pregnancy, because they seemed to be just ignore me as a person and just focused on my child, on the baby growing inside me. That made me feel quite worse, quite suicidal, ignored. But luckily that time around I went to the doctors, and I didn't stop telling people that I didn't feel great. And by the time at 7 months, I was diagnosed with prenatal depression and given fluoxetine, because it apparently didn't harm the baby, didn't harm the growing fetus. So I took that, and after about a month of taking that, I started to level back out again, because at that stage I wasn't giving people any eye contact. I started walking. I wasn't washing. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't caring for myself. I had no attachment to the baby growing inside me. And when I was telling people this, they were just ignoring me. So then I stopped speaking to people. I was then given by the doctor, she referred me to SLAM, and I started to have counselling sessions. I was given a social worker, a mental health social worker, and a mental health midwife come afterwards. The mental health social worker was young and inexperienced, and she made the experience even more traumatic for me. She was very textbook, and she kept threatening various things. Like, she just kept, like, she was basically making me feel that the child was going to be taken away from me, or I was going to be locked up in some kind of, unit if I spoke my truth. But at that stage, I just needed to speak, and I was still I'm still how I am now. With depression, I didn't ever lose my intelligence. It affected my emotions and my ability to cope with everyday life, but it didn't make me stupid. So I was still speaking to her quite intelligently, and that was the only thing that was allowing her to not section me, I believe, and put my child up for care. It was only until but one day she felt that she needed to do that, because I was just saying, I don't feel right. I think I booked myself into a hotel to try and kill myself, tried to take an overdose, but I prayed before I did it. And then I think the bottle broke or something. Whatever happened, I didn't manage to do it. And then I came back home. I told her that's what I'd done, because I wasn't. And the reason I kept telling people the truth is because I knew that I wasn't getting the adequate support that was necessary for me. And I was quite scared. I didn't want to die, but the depressive side of me wanted to end and stop things. And so the only way I thought of ending and stopping things was through death. But realistically, I didn't want to die. I wanted some help. And it wasn't a cry for help by thinking I'm going to, you know, take my life or having bad thoughts. It was actually the way I was thinking. And I just wanted someone to help me through it. It wasn't until an older social worker came, her boss came, assessed me, and then said, no, she doesn't need to be sectioned, she doesn't need anything, she just needs a different way of working, and they put in a different plan. That was 2016. Yeah, 2016. So I started attending like different clinics. I was given different teams to work with. By the time I had my daughter, which was late 2016, it was then another level of depression that kicked in, which then I was told I've got postnatal depression. So I connected with her, I connected with my daughter, but the lack of sleep and all of those things, as with a new child, and my housing, in my home environment, just added to depression. But once again, what the agencies were looking at, were monitoring. When I said to them I need help, what they were monitoring was my ability as a parent. And because my daughter was very much cared for and I was doing everything by the book in terms of being an excellent mother, they said I didn't need help. So I once again had to beg for help, because what was happening for me every single night, I was wishing that I wouldn't wake up or that my daughter wouldn't wake up. And it was real. I was thinking I just need life to change, and those are the only ways it's going to change. So I kept asking for help. Once again, went back to my doctor. She eventually gave me some more tablets to take, a different type of tablet. But during that stage as well, my eldest son was being attacked with knives. So there was all of that going on. My daughter's partner had ended things with me. Obviously, I was out of work. I had nowhere to live. Then I got up into a hostel. And even during speaking to housing and going through all the housing assessments, where it says, have you had any mental health experiences? Do you have mental health issues? And I ticked all the boxes and told them what was going on. They still put me in an environment which was totally unhelpful towards my mental health. Yeah, he was being quite manipulative. Even though he ended things, he was being very, very emotionally manipulative and threatening to take her away from me because he said that I had mental health issues. But he was very aware that it was perinatal and postnatal. So I had to fight against him. I was fighting against a lot of people, fighting against the housing, fighting against the police. And at the same time, I was also what the pregnancy had triggered up for me was reliving the trauma of my youth. So I was also attending. It's a group called Into the Light, where they talk about, childhood experiences, and you have a 12-week program where you go through this, counselling sessions. One of my friends mentioned to me that I was probably doing too much counselling, and I'm just trying to deal with everything at the same time, which probably wasn't helpful. And it also was apparent that every Friday that I had my mental health with SLAM, the appointment with SLAM, I would then come back home feeling very, very suicidal. So it became transparent to me that the sessions weren't being locked down, weren't being shut down. He was leaving me very, very much high and open. Why did I mention that? I think it's very important that, because when you're going through a service, particularly around mental health, you don't know what they're meant to do, and you only know that you feel bad. So if you leave the session and you still feel bad, your common sense says to you, well, it's because I've just spoken about everything, which is why I feel bad. I'm remembering things. But what I was told by someone who understands counselling is that I shouldn't feel like that if they shut the session down. And I think it's very important for women, men to understand, to ask. I now ask, if I have counselling, I say to them, how are you going to shut this session down? What are you going to do? Because I don't want to be left open with that. And I think it's really important for people to understand that. But those are just a few of my experiences around you know, when it's the 3 key moments of when I can say it started for me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. I mean, what a journey, you know, you've been on, and you've mentioned so many, you know, key points. But I think the bit for me, you've mentioned you sort of started this journey or this discussion talking about the childhood trauma, you know, and you've gone through this huge and what sounds, you know, to be quite a difficult, quite traumatic process, actually, quite a traumatic journey, you know. And you've mentioned about when, you know, later on after you've had your daughter and the situation that was going on, you know, with all the things to do with work, to do with housing, to do with her father, really reignited and triggered you again to that memory of all that childhood trauma.
Yeah.
You're up to this point where you are now. So, you know, for someone like yourself, then, or, you know, there's many other people out there, unfortunately, who might have had similar paths to you know, who might be able to share and identify, I'm sure, can identify to a lot of the things that you might have been through and you have been through. And if we bring that, I suppose, to the current time and the current day, then, you know, it's 2020, you know, we're at a time right now where we've been in lockdown for 5 weeks.
7 weeks.
7 weeks, there you go. 7 weeks. I'll say 4 weeks, 7 long weeks of being in lockdown. You know, so for someone who might have, you know, had previous trauma, you know, who has already has, you know, a mental health diagnosis, you know, who's then impacted with the additional, you know, stressors and trauma, actually, you know, that a number of people are faced with in terms of being in lockdown, being in quarantine, you know, I suppose it makes me think, well, how has it affected you? How has being in quarantine affected you with all this additional pre-existing mental health affected you? Has it affected you? You know, if it has affected you, in what ways really has it impacted you personally?
Because of, I eventually found some really good counsellors, particularly around emotional abuse, you know, what they say, you know, comes under the ban of domestic violence. So I found some good support groups for that. I completed CBT, which is obviously, as you know, but other people might not, cognitive behavioural therapy, around the trauma. And that allowed me, it took me 3 years basically to not have postnatal depression, and to learn new ways of coping. And I've moved out of the area, so I was already kind of isolated. But what this period of isolation has done, what it's reignited, is feelings of loneliness for me and inadequacies, because once again I've just gone back to just being mum, and for me that's makes me feel inadequate. I need to be a mother, a friend, a worker, a colleague, a cousin. I need to be it all. I need to live life to the full. That's the kind of Natalie that was before, when I first mentioned about grief, periods of where I was really changed. That's the Natalie before, was very much the center of action and the center of life and full of life. So what isolation has done for me is reminded me who I'm not, reminded me what I lack and what's lacking in my life and what I miss. And that took me through a period of having to process that. For the first few weeks, I was it was up and down. I was on and up. 1 minute I was up and the next minute I was down. And I had to just figure out what was going on in my mind, and use some of the coping strategies I learned through CBT, which kind of just catching my thoughts as they come and not letting them, not allowing myself to feed into my thoughts. So for me, how it's affected me is mentally, in terms of, there's just been like I've been having a mental battle in my head to say that this is going to end, and I do have a purpose, and I am fine, and you have healed, and things have changed, and just kind of ride this process out is what I kind of keep saying to myself every single day. The second thing, and the reason those things impacted me more was because when everyone was in the first weeks doing, talking about COVID and sending lots of WhatsApp information, there's lots of things on the news, that was just too much for me. And I kept telling people, stop sending me this information. It's affecting me. People did not understand how a WhatsApp message of information could be so disturbing to someone's thoughts. And I'm like, well, it is disturbing to mine. There's a constant stream of negativity, plus the news. I don't want to hear about death. I don't want to know how many people have died. I don't want to think about that. I'm already struggling, and I need to just, stay upbeat. And the other thing that was kind of aggravating me and triggering, was where everybody went out and bought loads of food, and then I had to be forced to use the food banks again, because the things that I and my daughter needed, well, not even myself really, because as mothers we won't eat if we don't have to, but the things that my daughter needed, nappies and just things, she's very fussy, things that she needed weren't in the shops, and I couldn't get out to the shops at certain times. People were like, we'll just go early. As a single mother, successfully managing mental health, to then be placed in a situation which is stressful, you can't just maneuver around it with a child, because it's going to create more stress for you. So I couldn't shop at 7 o'clock in the morning or at those times. I just had to stick to my routine. But luckily enough, some of the support groups that I'd already attended were giving out food vouchers still when I was going to the food bank. My family members, eventually, because some of them were quite ill, so eventually when they healed, they sent me some money in. I had some money from someone from a friend eventually deliver, buy some food, and those elements of support were really, really helpful to me. But I think that for me the biggest thing is work. I need to get back out there and do some work, because I feel that's my purpose. And I say it shouldn't be that, because that was one of the things that led to my first experience of depression, not being in work and not being able to identify Natalie as a manager or Natalie as a youth work professional. And I vowed that would never be something I should be able to say I'm just Natalie, and feel happy and content and strong by just saying Natalie. So I think what this process is doing for me is reminding me that even when you're vulnerable, it's okay. Even when you're vulnerable, it's a good place to be, rather than adding extra stresses onto yourself. If that's answered your question.
Yeah, no, it has, and amen to that. It's important, isn't it, during this time to take some time to, stop and reflect. But I suppose for you, where you've mentioned about previous, where you used to previously isolate yourself and cover your windows, for example, with wallpaper, this current situation now in terms of, COVID-19, coronavirus, it is leading many people to be quite lonely and isolated, especially if somebody's, for example, a single person where they're in their own home and they can't have much contact with people. I'm mindful, and I'm hearing you say about how much of that feeling of loneliness for you has come back, and that's a very real thing, because you've been able to identify that to another point in your life where you have felt those really intense feelings of emotion, of mental health or mental unwellness. And I think the other point as well that you've mentioned around the information overload, again, quite important, because I'm hearing you as somebody who's had clinical depression, who's been diagnosed with clinical depression, and managing all that you've had to during this time of COVID-19. You've mentioned about, battling your own thoughts, battling what's going on in your own head. So, I guess that's you trying to make sense of all the different things and feelings and emotions that you're going through. But I'm hearing you talk about the impacts of the increase of additional information on top of what the additional information that you've got going on in your head, all the additional stuff coming in via all the different social media platforms, and how much of a detrimental impact it's had on you. And I suppose that's something one of the reasons why I wanted to have this time to have this discussion with you, because I'm not quite sure I could be wrong. I'm sure there'll be many people out there to try and prove me wrong, but I'm not quite sure it's been fully understood about how much of an impact it can have on somebody who's already trying to manage day to day, you know, with their own mental health issues, you know. And you articulated really, really well as well when you've mentioned that previous, you know, in this journey of your mental health, where you know, you've had many opportunities where you've been speaking to people, work or professionals, to talk about what's going on for you, but because you have been able to articulate yourself, because you have, you know, you present yourself, you're a beautiful woman, you know, professional woman, you've worked in, you know, managerial roles and senior roles, so because you come across really, really well, and on the outside everyone thinks you're the strong one, you're the one that they go to get help and support, when you've had your own struggles and you tried to voice that, you've not been heard because of how you are perceived on the outside. And that's really, really, really important. And it's really important people, you know, don't just look at the outside layer, but really do take the time just to sit and listen. So I really do want to again thank you for, you know, talking to us and actually enabling people to really hear your story. I suppose that leads me quite nicely.
Can I just say that as well? You just reminded me. I think one of the reasons that I've agreed to speak about this in a frank way is because, as a professional working with vulnerable young people and vulnerable adults, I've worked with mental health adults as well. Mental health young people, I should say, 18 to 25. So working in professions where I've had to advocate or support or be in professional meetings or review panels, child protection panels with housing, social workers, mental health, school teachers, education, and other public bodies. For me, I thought that when I was going through it, I know what people are meant to be doing. And I didn't see that response coming back to me in the way that I would have responded to my service user getting the support that they needed. So for me as a professional, having to request the support of agencies that initially I'd be working alongside, and seeing the total gaps and the total flaws and the way that they just dismiss somebody who is presenting by themselves, for one, without someone speaking up on their behalf, is actually really, really disgraceful and really disturbing, disheartening, all the Ds, whatever. And I think the reason I say that is that, you know, professionals need to check themselves a bit more, and not just tick their own boxes, tick the boxes and the categories that are on their forms that they've been used to. And they need to just every day wake up as if it's a fresh new role and look at that client that's coming to them as a fresh person, not judging them. I bantered during one of my coping strategies was to banter. One of my coping strategies was to laugh. So I just to make every one of my professionals around me laugh. I'd have a joke with them. I'd say, yeah, I want to kill myself. And I've been thinking about, I haven't taken an overdose. And then the next minute I'd be joking about something. And they just weren't picking things up. And I think it's really disgusting, for professionals not to pick that up. I was shocked. And the reason, sorry, I'm going a bit all over the place, but part of the reason why I got out of it wasn't because of the professional standards of the mental health workers or the social. As I said, pregnancy, I had a mental health nurse, a mental health midwife. I was seeing SLAM professional. I had a family support worker, and all of those, and a social worker, and all of a separate social worker, not a mental health social worker, another social worker. And all of those people, I had to instrument them in my life. I had to direct them around what I needed. Basically, I became my own case. I became the client, the caseworker of myself. I was my own client. And so during my weakness, I had to direct these professionals on how to treat me and to get me the things that I needed. And yeah, that in itself is a strain, and that hasn't changed. And in terms of isolation, that hasn't changed. What another thing, it hasn't really impacted me with isolation, but what I've noticed is that there's so many people out there selfishly using COVID to benefit themselves, in the guise of supporting others, and that doesn't help people's mental health. Someone like yourself who is trained, qualified, has been dedicated to your craft, it's people like yourself who are recognised in their field that people need to be reaching out to. But you've got so many people that are just want to be Instagram famous, wants to be social media famous, and have got these platforms that they're using to talk about things that they really have no clue about, and they're actually making mental health a joke, for want of a better word. Yeah.
Mm. So, I mean, for you then, you've mentioned about, I suppose, being your own caseworker and client. Right? And I suppose you've mentioned some of the, I suppose, what I've heard of some of the maybe the flaws in some of the professionals that you specifically were working with. So what advice then, if any, would you be able to give to, or could you give to, professionals who might be coming across, other individuals like yourself?
Yeah, I think for the professionals, specifically for COVID, I think it's a matter of, or even without COVID, I think if someone presents to you with mental health, then stay in contact with them. I don't know if there's meant to be I don't know if doctors are meant to stay in contact with people, if they're meant to like bring them back up or have a follow-up check-in, but no one follows up with me with anything. Even when I was pregnant and going through mental health, people didn't follow up with the mental health, they followed up the journey of the pregnancy, of the fetus, the development of the fetus. It was me that had to keep requesting it for the support around mental health. Professionals believe that once you're given the pills and you take the pills and they're not affecting you, that, I don't know, it's meant to be our job to connect. But if we're already feeling, and professionals should know this, if it's really difficult for someone to come out and seek for help, just like this goes for friends, families, people say, call me if you're feeling bad. But when you're going through a time of challenge, a serious challenge, and you're feeling bad, you don't pick up the phone, and voicing that is one of the most difficult things to do. That's like climbing Mount Everest. So I think, professionals, friends, family, all for that, just need to, once they've heard of something, they just stay in contact with that person, follow up and see what it is. I think professionals also need to explain the process around depression. For me, prenatal and then postnatal, because I was getting my information from Google, and which is why I didn't get help, which is why my postnatal depression lasted for 3 years and turned into clinical, apparently, depression, because it said that postnatal depression only lasts up until the child is 1. So where I was still feeling quite depressed and low, I was like, well, I haven't got depression. I don't know what I've got, but I haven't got depression. So that's why I didn't go to help any. I just thought I just need to die because there's nothing wrong with me. And it wasn't until you said to me, no, the term postnatal can last for a year, but then it moves on to clinical, or it moves on to something else. So go to the doctor. And so at that point, when I went and I explained myself, then it was, apparently I had depression. So I think it's about explaining, not just saying, oh, you've got depression or you've got anxiety, explaining what that may look like, explaining what that journey may be, and also explaining how different medications affect and what isn't normal to take for a medication. Once again, with professionals, it's about, my key thing, I think, the key point I've written down is just that I'm an advocate for early intervention. And I think if you do follow up in time, if doctors, nurses, whoever does check in at an earlier point, then everybody's mental health will be lessened. things can be put in place prior to people actually taking their own lives, taking someone else's life. You know, because obviously many people are out there suffering mental health, and they could have an argument on the street and lose it on the street. They could get drunk and crash a car and heal someone else. So I think early intervention for me it's about getting in there early, not always waiting for the patient to contact if there's already been some things that have been flagged up.
So really key points again that you've mentioned, Natalie. What you're saying really loudly is around early intervention, getting in there early. So, you know, throughout your journey, we could go right back again to the beginning where there was the childhood trauma. Although it's not something that you picked up and recognized as childhood trauma until later on in your life, into your adult life, you still had many opportunities where you was tapping into various services where you could have got the support. And maybe if you got that support from that earlier stage, you wouldn't have necessarily have got to that point where you did book that hotel and make those plans to take your life. Thank God you wasn't successful. And I also hear about the information. So obviously, you know, people, I'm hearing you say that you particularly was given a diagnosis, but you wasn't really given much further information, and you were referring to Google. So I'm hearing you talk about the importance of information and correct information as well.
And the time, because what myself and other people that I've met who've, you know, got depression for whatever reasons, there's only been, I think, 2 doctors that have allocated a double slot for me to speak. So when you're trying to sit at a doctor's surgery with a baby or without a baby, just explaining your mental health, and you've got 10 minutes, you can't get everything out. If you're like me, you try and summarize as best as possible, which then makes you seem intelligent and compos mentis, because you're explaining everything quite succinctly. You're being quite numb. You haven't got the time to connect to your feelings. So you're being very, very matter of fact about everything. But I found that when I had 2 points over 3 years where a doctor has given me a double slot to talk about it, then I was able to get a lot more. The doctor was able to get a lot more from me and then give me a lot more advice back. So I think that's another thing. Just automatically give double slots. Or as the patient, if you're having mental health issues, when you're booking your appointment, just say, it's a mental health reason, and can I have a double slot, please?
You know, that's really important thing that you've mentioned, because one of the roles that I used to do is I used to work as a mental health consultant nurse within a primary care establishment, so within a GP surgery, and what that meant is I was able to provide patients who were presenting with mental health, ill health, either just emerging underlying mental health, mental illness, or actual diagnosed mental health. And what that meant is they had up to a half an hour, up to about a 20-30 minute slot, half an hour if I needed to give them half an hour, where they were able to meet with somebody who, you know, it was my field to be knowledgeable, an experienced clinician in the field of mental health, you know, to be able to advise upon medication, signpost, etc., and do assessments on the spot, as well as refer on and do more. And I think it's a shame that was a service that wasn't able to continue. You know, funding's always an issue, because I think a lot of the feedback that came through patients was, you know, in line with some of the things you're saying about, you know, it meant that there was someone that was there to listen, someone who really understood, someone who could have a holistic approach to them, because we know people are not just, mental health's not compartmentalized. You know, you've got to think about your physical health, your housing, other social issues, work, families, you know. So it was an opportunity for them to come to meet, have a good length of time with somebody who could, to a degree, pick up on some of those issues or support with some of those issues, taking into consideration their mental health, as well as be thinking about their medication, and equally be able to give them follow-ups in, you know, if it was 1 week that was needed, that was done. If it was 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, but they felt like the feedback I got was that patients felt listened to, they felt cared for, and they felt that there was somebody following them up. Far too often along my career pathway, patients have felt like they've been left. Yeah, and we know there's an increase in demand on mental health services, you know, so we know in some instances, you know, you either can't reach a threshold, or people's caseloads are so long, there's just longer and longer and longer and longer waits before you get that appointment. Which really takes on to the next point I wanted to touch on, was around medication. So you've mentioned obviously around, you know, early intervention and being given appropriate information and follow-up, but, you know, for someone like yourself, so you're clinically diagnosed with clinical depression, are you currently on medication now?
Yeah.
Okay, so during this process of COVID, have you said it's been about, well, it's been about 7 coming into 8 weeks now, I think, hasn't it, in terms of
Yeah.
isolation and quarantine? So have you been followed up in that time? Has your medication been reviewed at all?
Nothing, no phone calls. And I felt, there's been like a couple of instances where I felt, you know, my mood dip, and I thought, oh, maybe I should ask for like a higher level of medication. But I haven't rang the surgery because it seems, because, you know, you get the message on the phone about they're not having appointments, please stay away. I just feel that my issue around mental health is not important, because the only thing that they're considering is COVID. So I haven't been contacted, and I haven't reached out to doctors.
And that's really, really important again, isn't it? Because, you know, you've mentioned that, you know, your mood has gone up and down. Your mood has been impacted to some degree with the additional pressure and stresses of COVID-19. And even though you feel within yourself that you may need some changes being made or alterations made to your medication, you still don't feel able to approach or contact the GP surgery to get that appointment for that to be looked at and reviewed.
Yeah.
Now, for someone like yourself, you know, again, you mentioned a little while ago about being your own, I suppose, caseworker or therapist as well as client. You know, you have had something that's been getting you through, guiding you through, you know, giving you some kind of strength, you know, to be here, to remain here, to not follow through with, you know, attempted suicide, you know, to recognize when your mood's going up and down, and to be able to act accordingly, to be able to articulate, to be able to seek that support from services, even if the support hasn't been forthcoming. So I suppose my last question to you would really be, what do you understand has been keeping you and enabling you to manage to the point that you are now?
Okay, so that is definitely faith and God, and that I've always gone to, you know, I've always gone to Catholic schools. I was brought up, I was christened, I was raised in church in terms of going to Sunday school, and then I went to primary, secondary school, Catholic schools. So I've had an awareness and a knowledge of God, and I've called myself a Christian, but I wasn't practicing. But throughout the trauma that I experienced with my son specifically, when no one was helping me and I was preparing myself for his death, because that's another thing that grief had done for me. Because it was sudden grief perpetually keeps me in a state of mind now. Well, actually, no longer since CBT, but it continuously kept me in a state of mind to expect someone to die. So I was constantly waiting for someone to die so that I wouldn't be shocked by it anymore. If someone had a sneeze, when my daughter had a fit and went to hospital, in my head, she's going to die. Prepare yourself for that, Natalie. So during the stage where my son his life was looking like it was going to be taken, all I could do in preparation for his death, I just began to speak to God. And in that speaking to God, something felt a bit different than usual. I wasn't speaking to anyone else. No one else wasn't listening to me, I should say. And even though God wasn't physically responding back, I somehow felt a bit comforted. Just, I suppose, as if the yogis and I've tried meditation, and you've sat and you've meditated with the yogis and you feel comfort without saying anything. I've had crystals. I've used crystals in the past. set out intentions to the moon. I'm highlighting these things because for me, none of those things had the same change around my heart that it did when I knelt on the floor and said, God, help me, because I think my son's going to die. So after that moment, then I just kept praying and praying and praying, and I actually got baptized when my son didn't die, and it was clear that there was some good people around looking after him, angels looking after him, in fact. And that's one of the things that have kept me going throughout this process. Even this morning when I felt a bit low, you know, the weather doesn't help, I just took a look around my front room and recognized the blessings that I had and what I came in here with, and what I came into this flat with, and just to be humble. So it's not being myself as the Natalie that I know, that wants to be in the center of the action, have all the knowledge, be in control of everything. It's just recognizing that using this COVID time is reminding me that I'm not in control of anything. I need to lean on, if I can't lean on my friends, and I can't lean on a doctor, and I can't lean on a support group, once again, lean as much as I can on God. And that's been what's getting me through. Yeah, that's been what's getting me through. And my pastor from my church have been really, really supportive, ringing me and contacting me and making me feel quite open to speak to him about anything, not just church-based, just anything I want. And that's been really, really helpful. They're quite a unique church. Not quite a unique church, quite some unique individuals within that church, because I've been to other churches that treat you as if you're a demon possessed if you mention you've got depression, treat me as demon possessed if I say that I'm tired because I'm a single parent. And that takes me back to your previous question, when it's around advising friends and family. If you know someone's had a depression or mental health illness or whatever, anxiety, whatever it may be, trauma, that you should not judge them, and you should not try to heal them through placades of words. It's very, very unhelpful. Just as much as someone grieving and you say to them they're in a better place, these words that you feel are useful are not useful. Telling someone, snap out of it, telling someone you're so strong, you know, you're going to get over this, you're going to get through this, adds more pressure to us. It makes us feel hear that you're not listening to us. So if anybody, most family do want to support and they don't know how to, and they admit they don't know how to, but it's quite common sense in my head. If you don't know how to support someone that's going through mental health, maybe ask them if you can attend a GP surgery with them. Maybe ask if you can sit in that surgery, and then you can hear how they speak to the GP. You can hear what the GP says back to them. You won't be able to attend a counselling session with them or anything like that. But if you begin to attend those GP sessions, I'm guaranteed you will start to learn a bit more about what your family member or friend, partner is going through, rather than feeling stressed and feeling like you can't help them. You'll begin to understand what they need.
Praise God, that's wonderful. Thank you. So, you know, even though, you know, God is good, because even though, you know, you've had this difficult journey, you've been through these experiences, you know, COVID-19 has helped reignite some of those feelings that you felt from before. And even though it's a time of isolation where you might not have a great deal of contact with people, you know, what you've found really helpful is being able to lean on God when you felt you wasn't able to lean on others. You know, that is magnificent, and you felt that faith has been a help for you during this time. I think the point go on, sorry. Faith
and definitely honesty. Because I think even if someone isn't a Christian or have a faith, I think just the fact of them being honest with you, and that's another advice I'd give to people, especially during COVID. It's so annoying when you just get messages, silly, it doesn't affect my mental health, it annoys me, which can then trigger a mental health, trigger isolation, feelings of isolation. So when people are just sending just texts, like, how are you, hi, and then you respond, and they might not respond for another 5 hours or to the next day, or they're just sending you like WhatsApp pictures. To me, I think what people need to understand is that as a human race, we're all different. So why do we use social media to try and connect to people in exactly the same way? Like, I'm not going to have a conversation with you about your life and use those exact same words and have a conversation with my son or my auntie or my mother, because it's going to be irrelevant to them. It's not going to be personal. So I don't want to see tons of how are you messages coming through in a status with no personal attachment to it, because that makes me feel more isolated. That makes me feel as if you're not really caring about anything. It's just something generic. I think what people need to use this isolation time to do is call some people as well. Do you know what I mean? And people may know me and be watching this and be like, you haven't called me. And I will go back to saying, but that's how the experience of mental health has changed me. I am not the person that anybody knows anymore. I am no longer going to be that person that continuously reaches out to support others, because I found that it's made me empty. And when I needed filling up, I'm not saying I needed to get it from exactly those same people. When I needed filling up, I had nothing left for myself. So from now onwards, if my phone doesn't ring, then I'm not going to pick up my phone to ring others. And it's not to be selfish, not to be unchristian. It's basically a new tool that I've learned to protect my mental health.
Excellent. Natalie, I could sit here and I could speak to you all night, all day, I'm sure. All right. So I want to just thank you for taking your time to share your story with me. And, you know, I thank God for keeping you. I thank God that you have, you know, been able to use your faith to help give you strength and give you comfort, you know, when you felt that you wasn't maybe getting that from maybe other areas in your life where you felt you needed it to come from.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the conversation of faith is a big one. You know, perhaps we could meet again and have another conversation about where faith comes into, you know, mental health in a bit more detail. But, you know, I just want to thank you for your time. I think that, you know, you're amazing. I think your story is an important one that, you know, many people, you know, I think need to hear. I think it provides a lot of really important information, guidance, tips, advice for many people, you know, professionals, friends, families, churches, loved ones, everybody.
Yeah.
So I hope that, you know, this enables to your story, this time of our discussion now is able to bless people, you know, when they hear it. So yeah, I just want to say thank you again. Really, really appreciate your time. All right. So thank you. God bless you.